Okay, thank you again, everybody. Good morning. This is the 2019 Homeownership Set-Aside Program, and we have Michelle Carter on the line who will be sharing updates and the process to be able to access this funding. And as I think everyone is familiar with, but just in case, we have been contracting with Michelle to help us out with our Federal Home Loan Bank program. So I am going to turn it over to her. Michelle, you should be unmuted.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This will probably be a review for most of you, but there may be some new people as well. So if you have questions, let me know. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, first of all, the 2019 Homeownership Set-Aside Program is through Federal Home Loan Bank of Topeka, which most of you already know. They're going to have $6.6 million available this year. And last year they had 7.8, so they're going to have a little bit less this year. The round will open on Monday, this Monday, March 4th. It's coming Monday. It's actually a good idea if you're interested in reserving funds to start working on the request now if you're at least 60 days out from closing. And we'll talk about that more, but if you have time today, you can actually start working on a reservation. If not, you can wait until you're ready for the funds. And you can receive up to $5,000 per home, which can be used for down payment, closing cost assistance to first-time home buyers, and it can be used in rural and urban areas. And one of the good things about this program is there's no commitments to meet like there is in the affordable housing program for Federal Home Loan Bank. Some of you are maybe have participated in that program, and it's just a little bit more work than this one, so that's kind of the beauty of this program. One thing, if you don't take anything away from this meeting today, take this away, and that is it's very important if you're interested in getting the funds to not close on the home until you get an approved reservation from Federal Home Loan Bank. And actually, they will send the approval, Federal Home Loan Bank will send the approval to First Bank. They will notify me, and then I'll notify the affiliates immediately about the approval. So don't schedule your closing prior to that approval, or it will not be eligible for funds. The income has to be at or below 80% of the area median income. The member bank that we're using right now, I'm not sure if we're using multiple, but I know we have at least one member bank, and they can sponsor $25,000 a month. We may not have access to quite that much because we also share that money with another member. So we keep track of that as well, so it's really not something you need to worry about. It's just kind of an FYI. And the buyers, make sure they contribute at least $500 of their own money towards the purchase. And we'll talk about that later in the presentation as well, but that can be in the form of a down payment or paid outside of closing or something like that. We'll talk about that in more detail later in the presentation. Some of the other things to remember is buyers cannot receive cash back at closing. So if I get your closing disclosure and it's showing money going back to the borrower, that'll have to be remedied in some way. Usually what the Federal Home Loan Bank suggests is that money that is shown there will have to be deducted from the Federal Home Loan grant amount. But we can also redo the CD. But the best thing to do is just don't do it to begin with. Don't close it with it showing cash back to the borrower, because even if it's $1, they'll make you redo it. So most of you are aware it's a forgivable grant with a 5-year retention period. And if the family moves out prior to the 5 years, they may be required to pay a pro rata share of that back. It just depends on the circumstances, whether they're going to have any equity money come back to them at closing and that type of thing. So it's just something that we have to review on a case-by-case basis. But they won't make payments on it while it's an active grant, and it is forgivable after 5 years, so it's a great deal. New construction of single-family dwellings is allowed. However, the construction must be completed prior to closing. And we had a question from one of our affiliates about when USDA does a construction loan, they really don't do, on a certain program, they really don't do a closing for the permanent mortgage. So the question was asked the Federal Home Loan Bank if that were allowable, and the answer was no. So they'll actually have to have actually the funds can't be used for the construction part of the project. They can really only be used for the down payment and closing assistance.
Michelle, we have two questions before we move on from the slide. One is it 60 days or 90 days prior to closing?
As far as when they need to send the reservation in?
Yes.
It's better to send it about 60 days out if you can. And we'll talk about the guidelines. There's a lot of 60 and 90-day deadlines, so we'll talk about those later in the presentation. But it's better to wait. The reason we ask for you not to submit your reservation prior to 60 days out is because if we get the reservation too early, it's only good for 90 days and it will expire, and then you won't have a reservation at all. So it's better to wait 60 days and then submit your reservation, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay, great. And then we had one other question before I move on, and it's, are we trying to get another bank to work with us besides First Bank? And the answer is yes. Yes, we are. Okay, great.
Step one in the process is, of course, reserving the funds. And to do that, first of all, you have to identify a specific home buyer and a specific address. And you'll submit the HSP reservation form you will send that and your income documents, which we'll talk about more in a minute. You'll submit that to me. I will review it, and then we'll submit the reservation to our member bank, and they in turn submit it to Federal Home Loan Bank for review. And we'll go over in more detail this process. Okay, so here's some tips for submitting a successful reservation. And this is actually, there's a reservation checklist that you have access to when you'll be going to get your 2019 HSP documents. It's on the Habitat server, I believe. And make sure that when you go out there, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is when you go out to the server, don't save those documents on your desktop. If you save them on your desktop, they could change. So we want to make sure, and I want to kind of throw that in there. But the reservation form, the 2019 reservation form and checklist will be out there, and I think Karen's working on it. Should be out there soon. When you fill out that one piece of paper that you send to me with the income documents, there's some different questions on there. And for instance, it'll ask for the name and birth date of everyone in the home and the relationship to the borrower. Please fill out that information, because a lot of times when I get that form, those areas are left blank. And then I have to get a hold of the affiliate and find out the birth dates, or you know, what the relationships are between the different household members. And keep in mind that the property address cannot change. If you submit a reservation and you say it's on 205 Oak Street, and when I get the paperwork, it's 206 Oak Street, we've got a problem. It won't be eligible. We have to have the exact street address. Federal Home Loan Bank will reserve it, and what they would do in that case is they would make you re-reserve the funds. And of course, if it were already closed, that you wouldn't be able to do that. So keep in mind. And the other thing is make sure the name is on the reservation exactly how it's going to show on the closing documents, like the closing disclosure and the Federal Home Loan Bank retention agreement. For instance, we see this a lot with Hispanic families. Maybe their pay stubs and the reservation will say it will have one last name, and then when I go to do the closing documents, maybe that name and another name's on there. The name on the reservation, in other words, has to be exactly the same as what you're going to show on the closing documents. And if for some reason they don't, then we're going to have to start doing name affidavits and getting copies of a lot of paperwork. So if we can avoid that, it's best to do that, to get that correct. And the anticipated closing, I'm sorry, could you go back, Karen? Again, the anticipated closing date should be within the next 60 days before you reserve, because you don't want to reserve too early. And income documentation has to be submitted for all household members, and we'll talk about that in more detail as well. Okay? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about income. First of all, when you submit the reservation to me, the income should be within 30 days, and it's the very, very latest 60. If we go one day over that, and by the time I submit it to Federal Home Loan Bank, we'll have to re-verify the income documents. So make sure they're very recent from the time you send them to me. And what you need to send, you can send a signed VOE. And make sure if you send a VOE, it's filled out completely and signed by the employer. And please use the one on Habitat's website. It's the version that has everything that Federal Home Loan Bank needs on it. And I know there's some other versions out there, and it's fine if you use those for other programs. But if some of this information is missing, we'll end up having to redo it. And a lot of times the VOEs are unclear or not completely filled out, and in that case, Federal Home Loan Bank will require that a new VOE be filled out. So make sure that you look at the fields and make sure that they're all filled out and that they make sense. And if you're going to use pay stubs, send me enough to cover a 28-day period, and that could be, if they're paid monthly, it could be just one pay stub. Again, make sure they're current. And then what I'll do is I'll try to find the one out of the 3 or 4 that you send that probably represents their income, like what their usual income is, and maybe one that doesn't show a ton of overtime or something like that. That's kind of what Federal Home Loan Bank instructed us to do. But just go ahead and send those pay stubs. Make sure that information like the gross year-to-date is shown. Even the gross year-to-date overtime needs to be shown if there's overtime. The name of the company needs to show, the name of the employee. Everything on the pay stub has to be visible, because if there's information that's missing on there, we'll either have to get a new pay stub or a VOE that shows the information. We use award letters for Social Security and disability, and they must be dated in 2019. Tax return for self-employed, and if they haven't been employed for the full 12 months, then we require, or Federal Home Loan Bank requires, a profit and loss statement. You can use a 1099 for retirement benefits, annuity payments, W-2s for seasonal and non-traditional income, and a lot of times this will also include jobs kind of like paras for school districts that may not be employed the full 365 days, 52 weeks a year. And if you have any questions or have one that's tricky, give me a call or email it to me, and I'll run it through Federal Home Loan Bank's worksheet to see if it looks like it's going to have the information that we need. For anybody that's unemployed, age 18 and older, they have to submit a zero income certification form. And you have to use Federal Home Loan Bank's version, and it's located on Habitat's website. And again, please don't keep these on your desktop, because if Federal Home Loan Bank changes it, I will put a new copy out on Habitat's website, because if you happen to use an old version, and this is especially a hassle on a retention document, if you use an old retention document, they'll make you release it and re-record it. So try to make sure that you pull your documents from the website and not your desktop.
So
Okay.
Michelle, I have a couple of questions for you on this section, so I'm going to pause. One of the questions is, does Federal Home Loan Bank have a specific waiver, or should we use our individual waiver?
A waiver for what?
Rachel, can you clarify? And then while we're waiting for that, another question about, is the VOE, is it optional if you provide appropriate pay stubs? Or is it a required document no matter what?
No, you can submit either a VOE or pay stubs.
Okay.
You choose what you want to do. What I don't want you to do, and a lot of people do, is I don't need 20 pay stubs. I need a month's worth of pay stubs, and they need to be current. But I don't need to see pay stubs from 2015. Sometimes I'll get a packet and it'll have, income clear back 2 or 3 years back, and I don't need that, and I really don't need anything but current income. If I need anything additional, I'll request that. One thing that is helpful sometimes to put in the packet is the first pay stub of the year. And the reason I ask for that is Federal Home Loan Bank asks, when I fill out the worksheet, I have to put the first pay period of the year. So that's one thing that's helpful to include as well.
Okay, and then are there any special income rules for adult full-time students, not the home buyer?
Yeah, if they live with the parents and they're full-time students and they work, we have to have their income. It's counted. The only time we don't count their income is if they're just unemployed. I mean, if they're living in the home, the income has to be counted, whether they're a student or not.
And then I am going back to Rachel's question, and so it was about, does Federal Home Loan Bank have a specific waiver, and that was in reference to in order to use their personal information and communicate to a third party, to Federal Home Loan Bank or to you, Michelle.
Do they have a waiver, you said?
Yes.
I'm not sure if they do or not.
Rachel, let us look into that one for you, and we can get back. I'm writing that one down. Okay, and then
I understand that. I'm not sure, Rachel. I understand that question 100%. So, yeah, we'll look into that further.
And we'll follow up with you. And then John asked a question, and I can answer this one. Are the forms up on Habitat of Colorado site? They are not yet. We're going to email you out the reservation form so you have that. And then my hope is to have everything up by the close of business day on Monday. So when we have all of that information, we will let you know that it is now current. And then let's see, Audrey had a question. What is the first pay stub of the year includes all accumulated sick vacation time from the year before, and the reflected income is much higher than average?
So is that what I'm talking about by the first pay stub of the year is the year to date from the previous year shouldn't show. It should be the first pay stub of the year that starts the new year. Sometimes that can be a date in the previous year. Does that make sense?
They received the 2018 benefits on her January 2019 check.
Okay. Why don't you send me a copy of it so I can look at it? Because for me to try to, I mean, it's just so much easier for me to see the pay stub. So if you can send that to me.
Okay,
usually
great.
But I will answer a question. I will say that if there's something that causes the income to be askew, we can always get an explanation from the employer for Federal Home Loan Bank. But I'm guessing what you're talking about is, I think I know what you're saying, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. But send it to me and let me look at it.
Yes.
Okay, so is that all the
Mm,
questions?
it is. Michelle, do you have something clicking in the background?
No.
Okay. I'm not sure what it is, John. I know you just typed that answer, so we're going to chalk it up for some of our technical difficulties today. So we are on to step number 2.
Okay, reservation approved. Again, don't close on the home until you've received notification that Federal Home Loan Bank's approved your reservation. That will come from me. And when you read through it, there will be an expiration date in the letter, and that tells you what the last date is that we can request funds for this address. However, we're not going to wait until the last day or we won't get it done. So what I prefer is that you get me the request no later than 60 days after they give you that approval. So basically you can look at that expiration date and subtract 30 days, and that's really the drop dead date for you to get it to me so we can actually get, usually there's a lot of changes we have to make before we send it to Federal Home Loan Bank. I usually take a quick run through so we're not sending them a bunch of stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. Failure to adhere to this requirement, as far as if you close on the home prior to getting that, it won't be eligible. And we had a situation one year where, it came down to the minutes. And Federal Home Loan Bank required proof because the reservation and the closing were the same day, and we had to go and we had to literally have proof with a clock that the reservation was approved prior to the closing. So we don't want to be in that situation if we don't have to be. Okay, next screen. Step 3 is to schedule your loan closing. Closing needs to take place within 60 days of the reservation being approved. This gives us enough time to remedy issues before submitting it to Federal Home Loan Bank. If for some reason you run a little bit late, let me know and I will try to work it in. Usually I try to take things on a first-come, first-served basis, but obviously if we're running up against a closing deadline and we could possibly lose funds, then I'll do whatever I can to save the funds. But it's just not a good idea to wait until the last minute, because what happens is that requires me to send Federal Home Loan Bank a bunch of documents that probably aren't right, and they don't like to see that happen, especially if it recurs over and over. So try to get it. Don't ask for a reservation until you're pretty sure that you're going to be closing within the next 60 days. And once you close, you need to get that paperwork to me as soon as your retention doc is recorded so I can start the process. Do not send any original documents to Federal Home Loan Bank. They sent a memo around not too long ago and said some people were sending them original Federal Home Loan Bank retention agreements. They don't need those. We'll send them copies of those recorded agreements, and you keep the originals. I did check with Federal Home Loan Bank to see if they thought it was a problem on our end, and they said they didn't think it was. And I told them to let me know if they were getting original documents, and I don't think that any of you are doing that, but I just wanted to make you aware just in case.
Hey, Michelle, I'm going to pause you for a second. I don't know if it's our connection, my connection with the webinar, or something on your end, but we are getting a lot of clicking noise, and it actually stopped. I don't hear it right now.
Okay. I moved my phone to another location, so we'll see if this helps.
Okay, and I still hear a clicking in the background, almost like a clock ticking.
Yeah, I don't have a clock here. There's nothing ticking in this room, so I'm not sure what it would be.
Okay.
There's no ticking in here.
Okay. We'll keep going. Sorry.
Okay. The HSP funds need to be reflected on the HUD 1 or closing disclosure. And there is an example, there's going to be an example out there of how to do that. And if you have any questions, let me know. As a matter of fact, it's not a bad idea to let me review the closing disclosure or head 1 before you close, because a lot of times if there's a mistake on there, Federal Home Loan Bank will have you redo the closing paperwork, and there's nothing that, once it's closed, and if it's not correct, they're gonna make you redo that, which means you'll have to have the borrowers re-sign documents and all kinds of stuff. So it's better to catch the problems on the front end. The grant funds need to be labeled as an HSP grant, an FHL bank grant, or FHLB funds. And the amount obviously would be $5,000. Do not label this as a second mortgage or gift funds. They'll make you redo your CD if you do that. And again, there is an example of the CD on Habitat's website showing how to reflect the grant. Okay, next screen.
Okay, and we had, before I go on, we had one more question. The reservation process, yes, it is for the HSP funds and not AHP funds. Right now, the current AHP grant that we have has been allocated. All of those are currently reserved, and then we're looking at this HSP funding now. Did I say that correctly, Michelle?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, step 4 is the final disbursement. Okay. After closing, you'll submit the final documents to Federal Home Loan Bank after closing, you'll submit the final disbursement checklist to me with a copy to Karen. And then you'll also submit the following documents. And that would be a copy of the final signed closing disclosure or head 1, a recorded copy of the real estate retention agreement, and that template is on Habitat's website. You'll want to use that template. A copy of the homebuyer education certificate. The certificate needs to be signed by the provider of the education. If it's taken online, it needs to be signed by the borrower or whoever takes the education. A copy of a second mortgage, CD, and promissory note, if there is one. And basically, Federal Home Loan Bank likes to see that just to make sure that that the second mortgage and promissory note are forgivable and that there's not a payment. Because if there's a payment, we'll have to add that into their monthly housing cost. Again, documentation on all forgivable loans and grants, because they're going to want to see if they're forgivable or not. And there's a document on the website under the grants, which is the area that Karen was talking about. And it shows a list of reminders from Federal Home Loan Bank on everything you need to do. Like, it talks about the CD. It's really done from a perspective to the mortgage banker. But since Habitat's the lender, a lot of the information on there will apply to you. And a lot of the stuff on there, when it talks about lender's fees and that kind of thing, won't apply. But there are some good reminders about what needs to be shown on the settlement statement and CD and what they expect, and the guidelines for the home buyer education and what they expect in those types of documents. Okay.
So we're still getting a lot of, I don't know, some sort of clicking. The only thing I know to do right now is try to hang up and reconnect and see if it goes away. So I apologize to everybody. I'm going to keep the webinar open, but I'm going to hang up the audio, which means you're going to have to dial back in, and we'll see if that cleans it up at all, because I know it's getting louder. So okay, I'm going to try that. So please dial back in about 2 minutes. Actually, you might have, now that everybody's going. You might actually have to log back into, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm trying to fix this.